So this is the second video on the agricultural revolution, where we've been asking how humans could go from getting food this way in the Paleolithic era to this today.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Put down your hot dog!
A pretty amazing transformation that took place in just over 12,000 years. So in this video, we're going to be asking two big questions. First, we want to be able to explain the effects of the development of new technologies during the Neolithic era. And then second, we will be focusing on how were pastoral nomads different from settled agrarian societies, and what role did those pastoral nomads play in world history. So after watching this video, you should be able to explain the effects of the development of new technologies during the Neolithic era. So during the Neolithic era, there were a number of different technologies that were developed that had huge implications on farming, trade, and transportation. So first, one of the major innovations was pottery. And pottery enabled people to utilize that older Paleolithic technology of fire in order to heat food. And more importantly, as a result of having surplus food because of the agricultural revolution, now people needed a way of storing food so that it didn't spoil. It was critically important that they prevented bugs from getting into their, for instance, like grain supply. And so pottery was developed to serve that purpose. Second technology involved the creation of textiles or weaving. There's very few artifacts that remain because obviously over time textiles decompose. But we have some evidence suggesting that human beings created spun together plant fibers or maybe animal hairs, wool, and created textiles for the first time, which created a whole new specialized occupation for textile production. Third technology that developed is the plow, which allowed human beings to no longer have to plant by hand, but instead would harness the power of large domesticated animals. So a fourth technology developed during this period was the wheeled vehicle and the wheels. So a really critical innovation in terms of allowing for trade and transportation. Now, in order for you to have a wheeled vehicle, ultimately you need to have some kind of large domesticated animals to be able to pull the wheeled vehicle. And that's why, as we'll find out later, there actually weren't any wheeled vehicles in the Americas when Europeans first arrived, starting in the 1400s, because they didn't have those large domesticated pack animals to necessitate the creation of wheeled vehicles. So the development of wheeled vehicles in Eurasia. And then finally, metallurgy. And what metallurgy is really the technology of metals. So the humans, in terms of the metals they first used, were copper, because it has a relatively low melting point and it's pretty easy to bend. Now that's also the disadvantage to it, is it tends to be relatively brittle and bends really easily, and therefore it's not very durable. So over time, humans recognized that copper started replacing copper with bronze. So if you added a little bit of tin to copper, you get bronze. You heat those things up together. And so there was a period of world history that's known as the Bronze Age, where tools were built and developed out of bronze metals. And then finally, however, the humans started using iron metals, which had a higher melting point, but ultimately were stronger and could be fashioned in a way that created tools that were more long-lasting and durable and useful. And so iron technology is the last sort of technology of metals. Now, how are pastoral nomads different from agricultural societies, and what role did those pastoral nomadic groups play in world history? Now, if we think about the different types of human communities that formed, we started talking about in the Paleolithic era, the hunter-gathering societies. Now we've talked about that some people in certain regions of the world made this transition to more sedentary agriculture. So we have the development of agricultural societies. But again, it's important to kind of think about those two lifestyles as being on really a spectrum. And there were many people that sort of fit into the middle of that spectrum. And the sort of generalized term that we can use for those people is we can refer to them as pastoral nomads. So pastoral nomads are these mobile bands that follow herds of domesticated animals across the grasslands of Afro-Eurasia. And the name pastoral nomads is a good one because it really incorporates the two kind of characteristics of pastoral peoples um, that that sort of make them similar to hunter-gatherer societies, and that's the fact that they were nomadic, that they move around, but also the fact that they did have domesticated animals that they were raising and livestock and herds that they were raising across the grasslands of Afro-Eurasia. Now, they did not grow crops due to the harsh climate or geography. They didn't live in areas where it was conducive to developing domesticated plants. And so instead, they relied heavily on animals, such as horses, or goats, or camels, sheep. Now, the major nomadic groups that we'll study in this class, everyone loves the Mongols. Later, we'll talk about the Huns, the Xiongnu, who we'll associate with China, and then the Turks, who are going to spread out across Asia, bringing and spreading language along with them. Now, in terms of the cultural characteristics of pastoral nomads, this is a piece that was discovered in a grave site of a pastoral nomadic society, and it's really cool. This is a snow leopard mask. It kind of looks like a snow leopard, which is a cat that's native to that region. But you can also see that it has two heads of an ibex. Ibex are like giant goats. And then also you can see at the bottom down near the nose the formation of a bird. And so if you look at a piece like this, what cultural characteristics might we inferences can we make about these societies? One is that they were very attuned to their environment, and they most likely worshipped spirits in nature connected to their environment. Another social characteristic that we can draw from finding artifacts like that is that there was social hierarchy, there was social class status. Now, certainly not as much as later agrarian societies that we'll study, but whenever you have certain high class status items, rare items, especially in graves, that suggest that there is a social hierarchy that forms. They're also, although they tend to be less patriarchal and tend to give women greater rights in their society, as we'll find out, pastoral nomadic societies also did still have a degree of patriarchy in terms of their gender roles. Now, they negatively affected the environment when they were grazing their animals in terms of an environmental effect of pastoral nomadic groups. Now, they oftentimes fought and were in conflict with farming societies over resources, right? So these settled agrarian societies oftentimes had developed far more resources, food, and as a result, there was oftentimes conflict, as we'll see, between groups like the Xiongnu and the Chinese dynasties, like the Han Dynasty, groups like the Huns and other Eastern European tribes who came in and had conflict with the Roman Empire. So we'll see this as a constant theme throughout this class of this conflict between pastoral nomadic groups and farming societies. Now, pastoral nomads are the truck drivers of world history. They play a critical role in spreading culture, goods, and technology across the sort of drier, more arid regions of Central Asia. And so oftentimes we'll talk about the importance of pastoral nomadic groups as moving ideas and technology along. And a good example from this Neolithic period is the spread of language. So there were these nomadic peoples that were located in Central Asia, known as the Indo-Europeans, and they spread language all the way from Europe all the way down into India. And we actually know this today. There's one common Indo-European language. Sometimes this group is referred to as the Aryans. And they were nomadic pastoralists from Central Asia that spread language across Eurasia. And one of the reasons that we know this is there are certain words like mother, which in English is mother, which in other languages like German, mutter, Spanish, madre, Greek, meter, Latin, mater, Sanskrit, which is an Indian language, matar, that are so similar in their structure that they had to derive from a common root. And if you trace those roots all the way back, you come back to this Indo-European language. So an important example of humans migrating, these pastoral nomadic peoples migrating and spreading culture, in this case language, as they moved. So as a result of watching this video, you should be able to answer these two big questions. Again, be able to explain the effects of the development of new technologies on the Neolithic era and the impacts that it had on transportation, trade, and farming. And then two, how are pastoral nomadic peoples different from either hunting and gathering societies or agricultural agrarian societies? And then what role did those pastoral nomads play in world history? All right, thanks for watching.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Put down your hunter!
A pretty amazing transformation that took place in just over 12,000 years. So this is the second video on the agricultural revolution, where we've been asking how humans could go from getting food this way in the Paleolithic era to this today. Huge implications on farming, trade, and transportation. So first, one of the major innovations was pottery. And pottery enabled people to utilize that older Paleolithic technology of fire in order to heat. So in this video, we're going to be asking two big questions. First, where we want to be able to explain the effects of the development of new technologies during the Neolithic era. And then second, we will be focusing on how were pastoral nomads different from settled agrarian societies, and what role did those pastoral nomads play in world history. So after watching this video, you should be able to explain the effects of the development of new technologies during the Neolithic era. So during the Neolithic era, there were a number of different technologies that were developed that had